why are so many people afraid of, and I'll put it in quotes, self-help?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. It's related. They feel it's squishy, they feel it's unrealistic, and they also don't want to do it. They don't want to do it. People don't want to be told that if you're engaged in the same habitual behavior or frictions over and over and over, maybe you can do something and become a slightly better person to live with. Maybe you can do something and have habits that make you better to be around, or that make you more comfortable within your own skin. I know lots of people here in New York City who will cringe at any mention of self-help. They feel it's squishy, it's fuzzy-headed, it's unrealistic, it's going to make us all into these sheep-like automatons. And of course, they're speaking in the vacuum of experience. They're speaking in the vacuum of experience. They don't see or understand the nobility of the individual who takes even a single step towards self-elevation. And they're also stuck in a kind of subjective mindset. I was alluding to this before. If a critic would look at me and say, wow, Horowitz's ideas are delusory. Horowitz is in a dream world. His head is in the clouds. I would say, prove it. Prove it. Demonstrate that in the nature of my conduct. I'm all kinds of things in the world. I'm a worker. I'm an artist. I do my media. I raise my kids. I have my relationships. I maintain my household. I save for my retirement. Prove it. Where is the delusion in any of that? The only way that you can really measure the impact of a spiritual or ethical philosophy is in conduct. Where else do you find empiricism but conduct? So show me the conduct of the Alcoholics Anonymous member, or of the self-help reader, or of the individual spiritual seeker that falls short. Show me where their conduct falls short. And then we can talk about illusions or delusions. But otherwise, it's just a subjective statement.
And it's interesting because when you talk about conduct, you will talk about, in one simple idea, you talk about it in your Medium articles as well, self-help demanding personal excellence, not
It's huge.
optional.
Right, right. It's so demanding. I mean, look, when somebody walks into a 12-step group, they cannot walk out of that place unchanged. They could leave, of course, and people do it all the time, and that's the individual's choice. But if you stick with a given self-help program, a 12-step program, for example, because that's particularly rigorous, the individual will not remain unchanged. And sometimes I hear derisive phrases like self-help junkies. I like self-help junkies. I'm a self-help junkie. I feel that inspirational literature can be part of one's daily search, daily therapy. I read dozens of self-help and metaphysical books all the time. I'm very interested in new ideas, new possibilities, new ways of framing things. So to me, the self-help junkie is just another word for the determined person. I think it's wonderful.
It's interesting. A lot of the philosophies that we call, I guess, put in quotes, woo-woo today, were actually studied when we look at Harvard, we look at Thoreau, we look at Emerson.
Absolutely.
And so we've forgotten where we came from. But if we want to talk about self-help junkies, we can go all the way back to Benjamin Franklin, can't we?
Oh, absolutely. Benjamin Franklin's earliest tracts and pamphlets, sometimes he wrote them under the aegis of Poor Richard's Almanac, are largely colonial age self-help, early to bed, early to rise, and, various advice that he gave about moderation in habits, keeping one's word, not picking unnecessary arguments with people. They were colonial age Dale Carnegie. It's in the groundwater of our country. Ours has always been, for all its flaws, a self-help nation, and the term itself is attributable to Ralph Waldo Emerson, who coined it back in the 1840s in one of his essays. Emerson used the term self-help several times, and it's a noble term. It's a term with roots that are as deep as some of our best-known writers in ethical tracts in America.
So, and I love the term, and my audience, I love you guys, self-help junkies. I'm a self-help junkie. We're at the top of the charts on iTunes for self-help, but self-help does have a little bit of an image problem. What's the challenge, or what's wrong with self-help today?
Well, we do all get into cultural habits, let's say. And I do think that self-help and the spiritual therapeutic culture, the New Age culture, is in need of some shaking up, especially in terms of its verbiage, its cultural habits, its style of speaking. I think a certain style got solidified in the late 1960s, early 1970s, which Al Franken did a masterful job of lampooning with his Stuart Smalley character
Oh
on
yeah,
Saturday Night Live. And I like Stuart Smalley both
I'm with
as
you.
a joke and as a figure. I mean, what a lot of people miss is that Franken turned Stewart into a movie, Stewart Saves His Family. And I like the movie Stewart Saves His Family. It doesn't make a lot of best of lists, but I rather like it. But the point of the movie, and I encourage people to watch it, is that Stewart actually does save his family. Stewart in the movie, this funny sort of mawkish sounding guy in the oversized sweater and this lilt to his voice. Stewart is the one honest, earnest, hardworking guy in the movie, and he's surrounded by corrupt people, and he actually does save his family. So, that's the ultimate irony of the satire. However, I do think that we slip into certain modes of being. There's a little bit of a holier than thou language. There's, like anything else, there's a style of talk, a style of being that I think could probably use some shaking up. And I also feel very strongly about this. I do think that the pitfall of the new age, and when I say new age, I use that term in a positive way. I
Yes,
apply that
yes.
term to myself. It simply means therapeutic spirituality. The pitfall is there is a lack of accountability, business acumen, reliability on the new age. And I think we have to come face to face with this and not run away from that.
Well, you
And
just
I'd be happy to talk more about that.
yeah, well, it's fascinating because you said prove it a few minutes ago. You were
Yeah.
saying prove it, and what you're really talking about is one of the challenges that we can have as self-help junkies is that we can drink all the Kool-Aid but not take the action. In other words, we become spun and
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
grounded.
Right, that's a good way of putting it. I think that because New Age culture has correctly and rightly challenged the mainstream culture and said, hey, what you see is not all there is. The 9 to 5 job, the punching the clock, so to speak, is not all there is. There's a larger world. All of that's true and good and right, and I applaud it. But there's always an unintended consequence. And the unintended consequence of that, and this is something I've observed over the course of 3 decades as a writer, seeker, publisher, within the New Age world, is that the movement has also served to attract a great many people whose zeal to escape the pressures of outer life has led them to elevate the idea of being laid back or go with the flow at the expense of accountability, reliability, showing up. If you say you're going to show up to set up chairs or to run the camera at a certain event, or if somebody asks you where the bathroom is, you need to be able to respond to that, to function in that world. If you run a New Age center and you make an agreement to pay somebody, you need to follow through. You need to pay them. You need to keep your word. I have noticed, and I say this from a lot of experience within both the New Age and mainstream world and many points in between, that there is a greater than average problem with reliability, accountability, and keeping of one's word within the New Age culture. And we must look at that. We must not run away from that. That's an
I'm
opportunity.
I'm going to call it the Enlightenment Dilemma, which
Yes,
is
yes,
we believe I'm a spiritual being, which I believe we are, having a human existence. Awesome,
right,
great. But that we just want to get back to source. We want to get back to floating around in the ethers, forgetting
right,
that we incarnated, came into this meat suit for a very specific reason. We still need to
right.
chop wood, carry water, and do our best to help our
Absolutely.
fellow human being.
Absolutely. And we must never use that belief in a larger world as camouflage for bad practices, as camouflage for
Thank you.
bad practices. I personally know of New Age centers and have had skin in the game experience with New Age centers who do not pay their artists or their workshop teachers. They will agree to, and then they will run away when the emails come following up. There are well-known New Age centers right here in New York City, right where I'm sitting, who are notoriously bad about paying or about paying on time. And these same places will send you HTML newsletters about green business conferences or enlightenment in business. And yet their practices are no more ethical, no more foursquare than the very things they are criticizing out in the larger world. And they hide behind words like nonprofit. They hide behind words like volunteer.
Yeah.
They hide behind words like holistic. And in so doing, they are using those terms not with authenticity, but as camouflage for their own lack of business ethics. And we've all experienced this, and we have to be transparent about it within our culture, or it won't get better.
It's interesting that, thank you for sharing that. It's interesting that you use the word lack, because when I hear these business practices that you're describing, what I hear is a lack of abundance consciousness.
Yep.
They have things that they get to address. And this is one of the big challenges in self-help and in spirituality, is somewhere along the line we got lost, and you talk about it with power. We get lost and feel that we're not supposed to be powerful and we're not supposed to be abundant, because that's not very spiritual, for lack of a better term.
Right. And it kind of, and also, look, I understand the difficulties of running operations day to day. Everybody is dealing with a world that can be very stressful, but we have to walk the walk. And if we're going to talk about conscious business, we have to start right where we stand. It's immensely more powerful than anything words can bring.
On that note, who's Samuel Smiles? What can we learn from him?
Oh, Samuel Smiles. He was a British reformer, politician, and educator who in 1854 wrote a book called Self-Help. And that book helped to popularize the term self-help. And that was one of the first mass popular books of self-help in the English-speaking world. And as I alluded earlier, Smiles didn't coin the term self-help. He got that term from an essay that he admired, that he professed admiration for, that was written about 10 years earlier by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And Smiles' prescription for self-help is pretty tame by today's standards, but it has to do with self-education, independence of thought, self-sufficiency, reliability, accountability. These are things that we might take for granted, and yet the profundity of such things can be discovered only in their application. When we talk about these things, they sound familiar, they sound ordinary, and yet we don't appreciate their profundity until we actually try to live by them. So one of my projects this summer, we'll say, is saying to people, look, when you hear an idea that sounds overly familiar, whether it's from Samuel Smiles or Marianne Williamson or anybody else, take a second look at that idea, linger over it before you dismiss it, because chances are I'm not living it, or if I am living it, I'm living it very inconsistently. And so a simple principle like don't lie, or a simple principle like always keep your word, those things are simple only in the abstract. It's when you apply them that they put you in front of enormous questions. Because if I try to apply something like that, and I really try, and I find I can't do it, that places me in front of monumental questions about who I am, about my nature, about my psychology, about my relationship, my conduct, apropos of my stated principles. And those are just a few questions. Try it for 24 hours. Try it for 1 hour. 1 hour before dismissing it, because profundity is found in application.
It brings up, when we look at, for instance, going back to Marianne here, when we look at people or things under attack, part of the reason that we attack is when, if we turned the mirror on ourselves, we'd realize we're not doing the work ourselves.
Absolutely not doing the work ourselves. And, it's hugely entertaining to reinforce our habitual behavior and to make fun of folk who are doing something very different, which isn't to say that you can't make fun of people. Stephen Colbert told a joke the other night about Marianne and saying, why haven't we thought of healing America using crystals and bee pollen? And it's funny, and I dig it, and I understand it. My challenge, I suppose, to Stephen would be, make fun of it. There's nothing that can't be made fun of, but maybe you ought to have Marianne on the show too, because that would be one hell of a conversation. So,
and here's one hell of a mind bender. And try these things. That's the whole self-help movement. Try these things yourself. Experiment with them. Grab the crystals. Grab the bee pollen.
And here's the secret. He is. He is. And we all are. We all are. The most ardent materialist is going to an acupuncturist for his or her back pain, is trying a macrobiotic diet because their fiance said, this is going to give you more energy, is meditating because their allopathic physician said, you got high blood pressure, you want to try TM before we go onto meds. They're all doing it. They're all doing it. It's time we just be plain about it. Yeah.
Woohoo! Let's go from there. Let's switch gears. I want to talk about Emile Coué, and more specifically, how are the Beatles influenced by self-help?
Now here's a trip. Emile Coué is one of my true heroes. He was a French mind theorist from the early 20th century, and he became famous for his mantra, day by day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. And lots of people made fun of him. He died in 1926 and said, that simplistic little mantra can't change anything. But again, it comes back to what we were just discussing. Profundity is in application. And Coué had a particular prescription for how to use the mantra. He talked about the importance of using it in the moments before you fall asleep at night, just as you wake up in the morning. These hypnagogic states, these deeply relaxed states, are prime time for self-suggestion. I write about all of this in an article at Medium called "The Man Who Helped the Beatles Discover It Keeps on Getting Better." And the Beatles, particularly McCartney and Lennon, were into Coué, and they worked references to him in some of their songs, particularly the mantra, day by day, it's getting better. That formed the basis for the McCartney-Lennon song, It's Getting Better All the Time.
And Stuart Smalley.
And Stuart Smalley. And John Lennon, during his solo career, wrote a wonderful song called Beautiful Boy, a tribute to his son, in which he used Coué's mantra. And Coué has undergone a kind of quiet revolution recently because, and I read about this in the article, some of Coué's insights about suggestibility and human nature have been affirmed by recent placebo studies conducted at Harvard Medical School. And I spoke briefly with the director of Harvard's program in placebo studies. He knew all about Coué, and he told me that he and his collaborators had not been thinking of Coué when they designed some of their experiments, but he felt that some of their findings comported with some of Coué's own insights. And it's time to take a whole new look at Emile Coué. He was really a great figure, and if anybody's interested, I have an article up on Medium about him, and it comes with complete instructions as to how to use his mantra, and I really recommend it.
I just had an amazing time talking with Mitch Horowitz. To see more videos on how thoughts become things, click here, subscribe below.